The year is 1961, and one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, Hannah Arendt, is about to cover the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a high-ranking Nazi official in Jerusalem for the magazine The New Yorker. A piece of work that would contribute to her being thought of as one of the most profound political and social thinkers of our time, and a work that would cause her to receive copious amounts of death threats. Welcome to the Lifted Pages Book Club. Today we are discussing the work of Hannah Arendt as a way to set the stage for our first week of the book club for 2025. This week's readings are the introduction and section 1 of Being Good, a short introduction to ethics by Simon Blackburn. This is pages 1 through 55. And for those of you who are also reading the secondary book, we are reading pages 1 through 30 of Leo Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich. If you're not familiar with the book club, you can learn more down in the description of this video. It's a book club meets fitness club. Arendt's work, in particular her coverage of the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem and the banality of evil, is going to help paint a picture of a bad life, the life of Eichmann. And that's going to allow us to create a contrast to what we all want, a good life. Now, if you're unsure why evil and ethics are part of this discussion about what makes for a good life, the topic for the Lifted Pages Book Club in 2025, it's because the two are so intertwined. It's difficult to imagine a life that we would say is a good life if it's full of unethical behavior. It's even true for a business or an organization. It's hard to say a business is a good business if it only provides a highly valuable good or service. It needs to do that, and it needs to treat its employees well, be responsible with its waste and not pollute the environment, and so on. We don't look at someone who is selfish and does whatever they want without considering others and the consequences of their actions as someone living a good life. In our scheduled reading for this week, we will be introduced to how ethics plays a crucial role in this exploration into what makes for a good life. Blackburn explains it as the surrounding climate of ideas, and that this climate of ideas influences our conception of when things are going well and when things are going badly, what is admirable and what is contemptible. And it's safe to say that Hannah Arendt thought the actions of Adolf Eichmann were contemptible, but maybe not in the way you might think. Now, it's worth noting that Arendt's work was not without criticism. Many people viciously disagreed with her take on the Eichmann trials. My goal today is not to assess the level of ultimate truth contained within her work, but rather to learn about it because she is someone who has significantly impacted society and culture to this day, but also to highlight a key point she makes as it relates to the adventure we're about to embark on in this book club. Hannah Arendt was born in 1906 in Hanover, Germany, to a Jewish family. She started studying philosophy and theology at a young age and under renowned thinkers such as Karl Jaspers, Edmund Husserl, and Martin Heidegger. In fact, as an 18-year-old, she had Heidegger as her professor, and the two really clicked. And by that, I mean the 35-year-old Heidegger, who was married with children, had about a year-long affair with Arendt. After their romantic relationship ended, they maintained a more intellectual relationship over the years. He was kind of like a mentor to her. And this relationship is likely to have influenced a lot of her work because, for those of you who don't know much about Heidegger, he became a Nazi sympathizer. Now, Arendt fled Germany in 1933 to France and then eventually settled in the United States in 1941. And her first major work came out in 1951 titled The Origins of Totalitarianism. It was an incredibly meaningful topic to her. Jewish, from Germany, who is portrayed by her ex-lover and intellectual mentor. The power of ideology, of what causes someone to slip into it, was something she worked hard to understand. This is why she wanted to cover the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem in the 1960s. Everyone at that time was trying to understand how people could be a part of something as terrible as the Nazi regime. Adolf Eichmann was a high-ranking Nazi official who played a pivotal role in organizing the logistics of the Holocaust, facilitating the mass deportation of Jews to concentration camps. He was one of the people who would decide who would be put to death. Now, forgive me because I don't know that much about the history of this time, but the trial was particularly significant. It was the first time a Nazi official was being tried in a Jewish state for crimes against Jewish people specifically, unlike the Nuremberg trials, which tried people for crimes against humanity and was performed by an international tribunal. And Israel extracted Eichmann out of Argentina, where he had fled to after World War II, and that caused some controversy because it was seen as an act against Argentina's sovereignty. So this trial had a lot of attention. It was a big deal. There was more to it as well, and it's worth looking into if you're interested. It was the first time Holocaust survivors were able to publicly recount their experiences on such a big global stage. It was a big deal. And Arendt wanted to cover it, so she partnered with the New Yorker and came to Jerusalem. The trial itself lasted about 8 months and resulted in Eichmann being sentenced to hanging about 6 months after it concluded. Arendt didn't stay the whole time, but was there long enough to see Eichmann be questioned and to see how he responded to these cross-examinations. And ultimately, the trial led her to her controversial thesis on what she called the banality of evil. During this time, when Nazi officials were being tried for war crimes, there was this idea that the only way this all came to happen in the first place was the rise of an evil regime full of evil geniuses prepared to do evil things and deceive and use their evil intelligence to get other people to do evil things. People full of hate, people so immoral and foreign to the rest of humanity. How else could they partake in such atrocities? But what Arendt saw when Eichmann was on trial was not an evil, hate-filled man. It was something a lot worse. She saw someone who was ordinary, not an evil mastermind. He was kind of dim, someone who was obedient to the bureaucracy and demands of his job. He didn't even seem to be someone who hated the innocent people he was helping put to death. For Arendt, this made her realize the horrifying reality that this was just an average guy, and yet he was capable of doing these absolutely horrifying things out of mere obedience to his job. It was the realization that these unimaginable actions can be done by relatively regular people. Now, Arendt talked a lot about how post-Enlightenment societal structures played a role in setting the stage for totalitarian regimes, hence her first major work. But we don't have time to dive into that today. What's important to highlight is Arendt didn't think the rise of the Nazi regime was just an anomaly and completely random occurrence. She felt that the way society was being structured was creating the opportunity for this to happen. And that didn't mean that Eichmann wasn't personally responsible for his actions. He definitely was. But that we all need to be aware of why he would do what he did as a somewhat ordinary person. This was the banality of evil. That evil isn't usually done by people who are at their core evil people, but rather can be done by ordinary people being obedient to their jobs or the laws they're under. That this obedience without critically thinking about the ethical implications, without questioning the societal structures that might be rewarding unthinking compliance, that is all it takes. That Eichmann was an unthinking man who took the path given to him. The key reason I wanted to talk about Hannah Arendt today, despite her not being the author of the books we're reading right now, is because of what she thinks we should do about this problem. Arendt didn't like being called a political philosopher. She thought that the contemplative philosophy that was common throughout the 20th century was ineffective. People sitting around thinking about concepts but never doing anything. She thought of herself as a political theorist that was contributing ideas and frameworks that are actionable and contributing to the culture that we shape, but that also shapes us. That we need to mix deep thinking with an active, participatory life, not one secluded to our little bubble. As a book club, we obviously run this risk, reading books but never doing anything. Well, I think we should take Arendt's advice and figure out how we can take action with the knowledge we gain through the books that we read. We can help keep this spirit alive through our discussions on Discord. And we're part of the way there. Improving our understanding through reading and reflection and discussion is one way to take action. Obviously, the unthinking person wouldn't bother to challenge themselves with books or big questions like what makes for a good life. By taking the time to educate yourself and explore these ideas and think about how you can use them actively in your life is an incredible thing, and I hope you give yourself the credit you deserve. Arendt highlights in her work on the Eichmann trial that there is an utmost importance to moral reflection and personal accountability, not just in extreme situations, but in our everyday lives. That a good life is only possible if we ourselves are good and keep bad from snowballing into effect, be that personally through a series of bad decisions, putting ourselves in a bind, or societally. That we can't just try to avoid evil to avoid a bad life. We must actively try to be good. And this week, we begin with being good, a short introduction to ethics. Blackburn has a slightly different spin on this concept that Arendt is putting forward. See if you can catch it in the introduction section of his book. Next week, we'll return to summarize and talk about the introduction and section 1, which covers the 7 threats to ethics. A reminder that the syllabus and schedule are posted in the Schedule Book Club channel on the Discord server. On the fitness side of things, that video is going to be released very soon, so keep an eye out for that. The easiest way is to subscribe and click the notification bell, or join the Book and Fitness Club on Discord. It's free, and the books we're starting with are pretty short, and the reading schedule for January isn't too demanding. We're easing into it, so you can still catch up. I also have been playing around with the idea of showing some vlog type behind the scenes of how I organize my reading schedule and take notes, a look at my workouts, that type of thing. So if that sounds interesting, let me know. Thanks for listening. Talk with you next time.